A warm welcome to today's webinar. In this webinar, I will be supported by Howard Ginsberg, Director of Enterprise Architecture of PNC Financial Service in the US, and Jens Peter Jensen, the Chief Solution Architect Banking from SAP. What we will cover this afternoon in the upcoming hour is to see how you can use the BIAN model / the BIAN deliverables in an RFI RFP process. So we will show you two sides of the same coin. So one, how do you use it in the RFI RFP process from a bank perspective, and how does a vendor react if the question arises, can you show us on the BIAN model what your offering looks like. So that's what we have planned for today. You see there are still people dialing in, but due to the time we would like to start. So first, a short introduction. This is an overview of let's say all the people who signed up from all around the globe to attend this webinar, and I am extremely proud to see, let's say, all those countries, all those people are interested in what we are doing. So it's huge. So thank you very much. For some of you, it's rather extremely early or extremely late. So it's highly appreciated that you will find the time to join us. Just give you a short overview of our current BIAN members. So to give you a little bit in the insight of all the people behind this, all the organizations behind the banking industry architectural network, helping us in developing the model and the use of the model. We have a very young participant, so it would be highly appreciated if you can go on mute by using *6. So you see here our member base, the financial institutions and our partners. It's 66, 67 at this moment in time, and on the bottom line you see 4 of our academic partners that are also participating, doing studies and helping us with the material. Carnegie Mellon University in the US, Singapore Management University in Singapore, IDRBT, that's the Institute of Development and Research of Banking Technology in Hyderabad in India, and Competence Center Sourcing, part of the University of St. Gallen in Switzerland. So that is the group, the community delivering all our material that helps the industry to move forward. We will go into the first presenter of today. That's Howard from PNC in the US, and Howard will guide us to the way PNC uses the BIAN model, the BIAN deliverables, in vendor selection in their payment space. So Howard, I'll hand over to you, and if there are questions, please let us know in the chat box.
Thank you, Hans. Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, depending on where you're located. What I thought I would do is start off with a little bit of just a contextual overview, a little bit around some BIAN terminology so that we're all speaking the same language as we go forward, and then dive into a little bit more about how PNC has leveraged the service landscape, as Hans mentioned, from an RFI RFP perspective. So the way that BIAN is set up and the way that PNC looks at it, the service landscape provides a technology of all business capabilities within a bank. Within BIAN, each business capability is known as a service domain, and that's something to keep in mind as we go forward. The canonical elemental nature of a service domain enables us as a bank to identify the technologies that we have within our stack that are satisfying those business capabilities. We're going to take a look further in this webinar, and we'll also see that many times technologies span multiple business capabilities. Depending on what we're trying to drive towards, this could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing, and we'll talk about that a little bit further. In addition, there's often overlap between multiple technologies satisfying a business capability. This oftentimes creates additional spend and overhead for an organization, and as we talk about portfolio rationalization, as banks move forward to try and componentize things, it's important to keep in mind what you have in place already and how it will be impacted by your desire to move forward. So we can solve the problem of evaluating the interactions between service domains in order to satisfy a business process. In BIAN, these are known as business scenarios. We're going to see an example of that as we go forward. The combination of service domains as elemental building blocks when combined to create business scenarios enables a bank to be able to break up the technologies, thus leading towards a more component-based or service-oriented deployment of those technologies. And finally, as we go through with the topic at hand today, we're going to see that using the service domains of BIAN to establish the scope of an RFI RFP enables us as a bank to stay focused on how various vendors satisfy the capabilities desired. In the example we're going to walk through today, PNC conducted an RFP to evaluate our payments processing platform for wire and ACH payments, and we will start to step through how we achieve success with that. So what you see before you right now is the BIAN Service Landscape 4.0 that was just released in the last couple weeks. And what we're going to do is you've got the service domains that are all listed in the yellow boxes. And what we're going to start talking about now is how I can leverage this as a foundation in which I can start to identify the scope of what I want to actually assess. So if we start off very simply, if I take requirements that I know about leading into an RFI RFP for what I want to potentially publish out to a vendor to respond to, I can oftentimes have a variety of things, and they span across a variety of areas within the organization. And as we start talking about how vendors will respond to that and what actually matters to me, I need to be able to rationalize that down. So what I can start by doing is highlighting the service domains that are responsible for providing the coverage of all of the known requirements that I've put forward into that potential RFI RFP to go out the door. So when I look at these things, it makes it very easy to want to say, well, I want to combine some of these service domains together. Well, as we look at the elemental nature of the service domains, we want to keep them separate from a business capability perspective. What we'll see as we go forward is that oftentimes I want to have a single technology solution that provides the answer for those service domains. If I simplify down the service domains for the exercise around payments that we just highlighted, what we found was that around 36 service domains satisfied approximately 300 initial requirements that were put forward by our business. What we have to start doing now is to rationalize out what our technology solution will handle and what it should interact with. We do this by looking at the service domains that satisfy the requirements, and then we also look at the business scenarios that BIAN provides to jumpstart this effort. What you see here now is an example of a business scenario that was out of the box provided by BIAN. We can see the interactions between service domains to satisfy wiring a payment to an account at another bank. The more scenarios we evaluate, we can begin to determine the service domains that we want the technology solution to satisfy. In this, as we look at an example of this, we can see very easily that payment execution service domain is most likely going to be a part of the solution. But would we want that solution to also satisfy the current account capability? Probably not. As we started to evaluate how we want the service domains to be in scope and out of scope, we looked at what else would want to use that capability within the bank. And would I want a payment solution to be the provider of that current account capability? In this case, no. But do I want that payment solution to be the provider of the payment execution capability? Absolutely. As we concluded the assessment of how we wanted to, what we decided to be in scope and out of scope, if you will, from an assessment perspective, we identified 3 primary service domains to be in scope. We also specialized a few service domains based on the financial message gateway service domain, specialized them for ACH, wire, and chips handling. One of the interesting things about BIAN is that it allows itself to be extended or specialized, if you will, based on organizational constructs, geopolitical constructs, etc. And so from a PNC perspective, we looked at these service domains and we decided that we wanted to specialize around them, and we wanted them to be in scope for what we were potentially going to consider in a vendor solution. In addition, through the business scenarios, we also identified the service domains that must interact with the payment solutions. And as we migrate from business capabilities and processes to overall solutions, the technologies that provide these capabilities must also be identified as part of the overall initiative to do any kind of modernization. We also identified which service domains needed to be involved in the overall handling of a payment. These capabilities interact with the service domains that interface with the payment solution. Therefore, from a technology perspective, the system really doesn't need to be aware because it's going to interact with something else that's already talking to. But in order to provide the holistic picture of what we're doing from an initiative perspective and then to round out the RFI RFP with any questions that we may have, it's important to highlight all of these things. Now we revisit our service landscape 4.0, and now we've updated the shading to color code what's in scope, what's interfaced, and what's a boundary that's something that's needed to exist to process a payment. We found within PNC that this representation of the taxonomy of BIAN is very crucial as a communication vehicle with senior leadership within the bank. It's starting to become a very standard way in which we represent the bank as a whole. We use this when we present in various stakeholder meetings, and it's important as we roll these things out that everyone speak the same language. What's great about this is I can take the same information because it's an industry standard. I can provide this to a vendor, and they can react accordingly, and I don't have to explain what my definitions mean versus what they may be receiving. One of the things that becomes important to do as this continues to drive forward is to take an informal approach to those business scenarios. I showed one example of a business scenario. We created 18 as part of an evaluation that we undertook. So in order to help put this forward from an overall solution perspective, it becomes important to kind of abstract that out to a higher level. This is an example of how one of those business scenarios can map to what's called a wireframe within the BIAN construct. If we take all of the scenarios across a variety of wireframes and abstract that out to a full overlay, I can come up with a consolidated wireframe of the entire behavior of interactions between service domains. This can serve as a foundational discussion for what is in scope, out of scope, etc., and also to define how the technology solution handles these things. One of the things that is important to do is to go from, as we try to map from business capabilities to technologies that handle them to where I want to have the conversations with the vendors, it's important to take a look at my current ecosystem and what is driving what. So what you see here is a system overlay of what is currently handling some of these behaviors today. And you also see that in this example, I've got systems D, I, and H cover the service domains that are in scope for what I want to evaluate. And so from there, from a planning perspective internally, I need to be aware of these things so I can rationalize them down and plan accordingly to drive forward with how I'm going to handle these things. So these also become important factors as we talk to vendors from an implementation perspective of how do we start to work with them to plug in something new, and how do we work with them as we try to unplug things. Now that we've identified the service domains that are in scope, I can now start doing a like-for-like comparison of products. What's important here is now we've kind of abstracted away any of the things that in theory would be distractions as we start talking about solutions. I can take away things that are requirements for the overall initiative, but need to be satisfied by something else, and place those to the side to be satisfied in a different conversation at a different time, while I focus on the core technology platforms that are available from vendors to satisfy the needs that I have. At the same time, I can also work with the vendors to have the discussion around how they'll interface with those other capabilities that I have in the bank. What are the technology integration points that they provide? How do they go about it, et cetera. We leveraged a very simple construct that is common in the marketplace to do a scorecard type mechanism to do some feature set analysis, is what we've called it within BIAN. And what you see here is one of the service domains that's in scope. And we see here that I've got the various feature types within BIAN, initialize and register, invocate and execution, et cetera, going down. And what I can do now is to start to bridge the gap from business to technology by providing a set of business requirements that I'm looking for the vendor to meet that are deeper than what the service domains will go to. And then I can also start looking at the non-functional or technical requirements that I need that solution to satisfy as well. And so from here, what I can start to do is to assess the gaps between the vendors to understand who provides what, how do they provide it, what happens when they provide something that I deem out of scope, but it's part of their system. A very simple example of this is customer information needing to be in a lot of systems. Can the vendor interface with my MDM platform for interacting with customer information? If they need to ingest that information, how do I ensure that they are not a system of record for this? But at the same time, I want to make sure that the system performs adequately to meet the needs of the overall engagement. Once I've honed in on all of that, I now am at the point where, from an RFI RFP perspective, the vendors have successfully responded to my questions. We've scored them against a feature set type behavior. We've done an overlay to the wireframes, et cetera, and now I'm able to start making some decisions. So from the overall perspective of the bank, I was able to leverage the service landscape, the business scenarios that come out of the box, the wireframing that we put together, and the feature set construct in order to define scope. I was able to use this to assess vendors based on their ability to meet the requirements of the organization in a component-based and service-oriented approach. I will turn it over to Hans and Jens to pick up with the other side of the coin.
Okay, Howard, thank you. This is Hans. Howard, I have an additional question. So what is let's say, the current state of the project? So where are you in the whole of the RFI RFP process?
Our RFI RFP is actually complete. Mm-hmm. We've made some decisions on how we want to approach things going forward, and we're actually executing on those approaches. Okay. And another question is, so if you look at the whole of the process, do you think you gained some time by using this methodology, using the BIAN material, compared with if you would do it, let's say, in a traditional RFI RFP process? We absolutely saved time. One of the biggest challenges that we had at the onset of this was to identify the scope of what's in or what's out. And when we tried it without BIAN at first, we weren't able to define what we wanted to be in the technology solution and what we wanted to be out. When we applied the BIAN model over top of all that, in a span of a couple weeks, we were able to have a very clear-cut answer for what we wanted to have in that RFI RFP. So it definitely provided a lot of time savings. I think we would have had a lot of distractions along the way that would have taken a lot longer to get past had we not had the framework, the scenarios that have come from the membership, and the wireframing that we worked in conjunction with BIAN along the way to put together.
Okay, great. And let's say, to use a buzzword, and so how did it help you in what you call the business IT alignment?
This was extremely helpful from a business and IT alignment perspective. The business came forward saying, hey, we want to do an assessment of this space. And the space when we start talking about payments is huge. And so we had to be able to break it down, componentize some of the various functions in which they were looking to satisfy. And by having the ability to start driving from business to technology, we were all speaking the same language. There was nothing lost in translation. And as we were able to componentize things down from an overall planning perspective of managing the overall technology stack of the portfolio, we were able to stay in alignment with our business to start level setting prioritization and expectations of what could or could not be achieved. As I mentioned, we saw several systems overlapping functionality we were looking to alter in the future. And there's pros and cons with doing various sequencings at different times, and we were able to work through that with our business to make sure at the end of the day we manage the expectations of the customers of PNC in order to provide a rich experience in the future.
Okay, well, great. Thank you. So we will be open for questions from the audience, let's say, on the end of the webinar. So I would like to hand over to Jens Peter from SAP. So Jens Peter, if you can take it from here.
All right, thank you, Hans, and well, also welcome from my side to everybody. After this, impressive story from PNC from the bank side, I think it's on the vendor side to come up with a point of view. First of all, three statements from my side. So first of all, BIAN is ready to be used as a structural element as part of such a business transformation journey as PNC has introduced it. I think that's a very important message from also our side, from a vendor's perspective. So absolutely that can be supported by BIAN at this point in time. For us, it has the great advantage that it allows us to articulate the scope and the strength of our solution. Hand in hand with that, of course, it is also that we are able to articulate what are we not covered. There are also in lots of situations, of course, misunderstandings, that there's an expectation that we can cover more than what we're actually focusing on. Of course, as a member of BIAN, we say that most of the major core banking vendors vendors of banking-specific software are members of BIAN, and via that, independent of the concrete scope, you can expect that to whomever you send an RFI and RFP, that these vendors are prepared to respond based on this terminology. What we have to have in mind is that for a business transformation itself, the journey and the architecture framework you need is substantially broader, of course, of what BIAN offers. So there is a need to have a very clear understanding from the very beginning on how BIAN fits into the architecture framework. So the architecture is there that it reduces the complexity we deal with. Well, if it's not reducing it, it's that we have a clear path how to handle it in a simple, transparent, and controlled manner. And that means we did an overall framework for that. Every vendor and every service provider potentially has a methodology. From a bank's perspective, you have a methodology, and as part of the business transformation journey, it needs to be brought in sync. And from a vendor perspective, we start then with a methodology to accompany a whole business transformation journey, with BIAN being a part of that. So on the next slide, you see what that means from a first drill-down perspective. So any banking architecture framework, I assume, has the ambition that we support with such a framework, the banks, so you, to transform in measurable steps. So step by step. You start a journey, you have a target operating model, you have a target picture in mind, but this requires several steps. And every step shall contribute to the target picture in a controlled and measurable manner. It starts with a primarily and business-driven discussion. So drive growth and innovation as a target. Such KPIs, and business-wise, first of all, you come up with a conclusion. What would you like to achieve? As a result of that, we assume you come up with we come up with a transformation plan with some initiatives which realize then in projects which are there to come up with measurable outcomes. On that side, for the first time, concrete application and IP is required to come up with such a plan. So now I see that nothing is being shared. You need to correct me if you still see something.
No, yeah, it's back.
Okay, thank you. And as a third step, as soon as a concrete planning has been done, then we can come up with the detailed realization of the components which have been selected. So selection of the concrete solutions, what you do with vendors, what you do in-house, that happens in the planning phase, and then assuming now that a vendor with a packaged solution has been selected, the delivery of the concrete solution happens in the execution phase. Assuming now that that is the end-to-end world in which we act and realize a transformation plan, on the next slide we then see how the role of BIAN could be. In a starting point, when we talk about business capability heat mapping, a kind of assessing where you are today, assessing where you business-wise would like to go, where you would like to set priorities, in this vision and strategy part, that is a phase where we haven't experienced BIAN at this point in time. The cornerstone of value appears in the next step as soon as you come up with a concrete initiative and you have a scope in mind, like a payment transformation, then to rationalize and make more concrete what the scope of such a transformation is, that is under the planning phase, that is the sweet spot of the BIAN service landscape, as it has been introduced by Howard. At that point in time, you also talk about potentially concrete vendor solutions, and that is what is meant here by the business object models. These are concrete softwares with concrete business objects. This is an element already now going beyond a standard. This is a concrete potential software environment against which you assess then, which is assessed against the BIAN service landscape. As soon as it then comes to the realization, there is a whole translation then from a business architecture perspective, the business processes you would like to see realized, down to the integration patterns which are called here message flows, so that every single interaction between components is modeled and documented, down to the application architecture and all the concrete settings in every application you have chosen now to use. And that part goes beyond BIAN. This is, of course, heavily dependent then of the concrete applications you have chosen to use. So this is a world we have experienced now several times when it comes to methodology end-to-end and a role of BIAN supporting that exercise. And as I said, to understand the role of BIAN in the end-to-end context is absolutely critical. We assume you will always adopt partly from your vendors and service providers. You will also adopt parts of the methodology hand in hand with the methodology you already and the framework you already have in place. All right, on the next slide, so we have this discussion to illustrate that typically with showing 4 use cases. And the first use case, strategy and planning, has as a result the respective initiative and rationalize these business initiatives. Then it comes to selection process, RFI RFP process, or whatever exact process you follow to select a solution approach. And there the question will be, as far as it relates to SAP or any other vendor, you ask for the respective coverage of the vendor solution, in how far and at which quality the respective requirements are supported. The third use case is then to go into blueprinting, so that the solution is really designed based on the selected vendor. And the fourth use case is then to make that happen. Here, meant by a rapid deployment solution, I mean that the typical request we receive is, okay, when it comes to a payment transformation, just as an example, this is something other banks already went through, so I would just like to have the common or best practice being brought into my bank as a rapid start, up to the point for really rapid deployment. Could be even, you can think of a cloud deployment, so that really there's an easy way how to get such a solution realized. So all these steps are there to be structured and to accelerate the process. And the cornerstone for BIAN is now to support the use case number 2. In SAP terms, when we look at the next slide, that means that BIAN allows us to easily communicate what is our scope, what is our coverage. Now, independent of a concrete scenario, we have mapped, of course, our complete portfolio against BIAN. And via that, we are in a position to communicate out of the box what are the capabilities are we able with a packaged solution to support, and what are the components we are not able to support. So that is a static picture, not talking about business processes, but a cornerstone to respond to any RFI RFP. So the learning for us was, it's fairly easy to map our software against the service domains, which is a quality, which shows the quality also of the BIAN service domains. It is complete, so we are able to map all our solutions against it, and it allows us to communicate very transparent. What I feel is enormously relevant now is that this exercise can be done in a tool-based manner and not just on PowerPoint, Excel, or something like that. These are great tools also, but what I mean is an enterprise architecture management tool environment, so that you can use this exercise as being a part of an enterprise architecture management work you need to do, and for that, of course, you need an enterprise architecture management tool. We use Power Designer as a framework. We have all the BIAN content in, and that allows us via that to be to allow to start earlier with the discussion on transformation, and to progress with the discussion as soon as it comes to, please show me now how a concrete service domain, how a set of requirements is actually supported with SAP software. So there is some additional potential. So at this level, we also communicate related to solution maturity. I think that's quite important, not just the coverage, but same that the maturity, that there's a maturity measurement. And we also use views on the service landscape to be able to communicate for concrete lines of business, coverage and scope. Additional quality we could bring in, and BIAN is working on that, is that as soon as we get to a certification level, so that this kind of color coding I'm doing here is not just my individual or the SAP's individual assessment, but there's some transparency on the quality of that mapping. And I think that would be very helpful for the future for you also as a bank. The limitation with this approach or challenges we have experienced so far is that the first piece, and that is very, very important, is that the visibility on the quality of a service orientation, which is a sweet spot of SAP, for example, that this quality cannot be communicated via this approach. So it is not targeted to be it, but it's very important because when we go through such a componentized discussion, of course we have in mind to gain agility and innovation power, service orientation. This is very hard to communicate it with this approach, and I will illustrate it in a subsequent slide. And the second is, in lots of cases, so most core banking vendors or banking vendors have multiple products. So even one vendor has multiple products for the same capability covered here by a service domain. To communicate how this all fits together is quite a challenge. That is something I think we have experienced now several times, that as soon as a vendor you have a parallel product strategy or multiple dual product strategy, there are some additional vehicles required to avoid misunderstandings. Good. So let's go to the next slide. What we have seen a few times is concrete RFIs, RFPs, related now or structured by the service domain. As soon as that is the case, we can of course follow the path similar to what Howard has introduced. The majority of the RFIs, RFPs are more on a level to ask, are you BIAN compliant? Respectively, are you BIAN certified? So I hope it has become clear over the course now of this webinar. We are at a stage where we can publish RFIs, RFPs being more concrete. So I strongly recommend from a vendor perspective to go beyond and really structure a service and an RFI by BIAN service domain. Independent of the breadth of the scope. The broader the scope, the easier it is actually, or the more value you get because the more misunderstandings are there when it comes to deviating understandings of a single requirement. For us, it allowed us to be quite quick when it comes to responding to the vendor's needs. It was quite quick also to clarify open questions when we were not clear about what the concrete ask is. I can only strongly recommend to heavily involve the architecture management teams of the banks. So I suggest that they should be in charge of translating the bank's business requirements toward to a BIAN structure and to assess an alpha that is adequate, and then to steer also the process and clarifying open semantic questions. So that helps enormously if such a role is very clear on the bank side to respond to questions which may occur on our side. Now, it is not only the banks who have learned that such a structure as proposed here adds value. Also, analysts have identified that. So when you look for different analyst reports, you will see that they have adopted, also from their perspective, BIAN structure, because it also allows them to come up with just an easy, standard semantic across banking. Okay, now as soon as we have that result from a BIAN RFI RFP, it comes to the realization. And on the realization side, I would like to make here transparent that there is a difference between what we now concluded, what we business-wise need, and what we get in a service-oriented architecture from a vendor perspective. Most simple example I always feel is party data management. So there's one service domain, party data management within BIAN, which is part of this bank on a page. Everybody can easily understand that, and I think party data management is quite easy to understand, and there's a nice and a comprehensive description for that. On an application side, that level of granularity is not adequate to communicate what service-wise is required. So a simple example, so what we experience that in several cases we have a one-to-N relationship between a service domain and what we have as in the software as service-enabled business objects. So as business objects in this case, we differentiate then into what we call a business partner, which is in BIAN terms the party, and a business partner relationship. So we have two business objects which sum up to one service domain, and the business objects then are service-enabled. So on the next slide, we see that in a bit more structural manner now. So as soon as we go to the BIAN service domain, they offer this comprehensive set of business capabilities grouped together with a whole range of services required. And as soon as it then comes to the IT capabilities, we suggest to have in mind that there is a one-to-N relationship between service domains and business objects, and the business objects then come up with the respective service interfaces and messages based on the structure defined within a business object. So that is then relevant in a discussion when it comes to the blueprinting. So in the subsequent phase, in the phase number 3 I've introduced, and for the use case number 2, the BIAN structure, as I've discussed it earlier, is perfectly suitable for the requirements we have here to align between business, IT, and vendors. And with that, I hand back to you, Hans.
Okay, thank you, Jens Peter. So, Jens, I have also some questions for you. So, if you, let's say, by just putting your finger in the air, how many of the RFI RFPs is a request to align it or plot it on the BIAN deliverables?
So the majority of the RFIs, RFPs have questions related to BIAN, and that has just started last year. That was a wave which started last year, and so that was very interesting to see. So as I've introduced earlier, there is still a potential to utilize more than just qualitative questions and also come up with a complete structural approach and utilize BIAN in that environment.
Okay. You also mentioned that you are using a tool, Power Designer, that you added the BIAN content into the Power Designer tool. And do you make that also available for your customers? Is that for SAP use only?
Yeah, so the path is the following. So the first thing is that we have an import of the BIAN model into Power Designer so that we have it available within SAP. Because we, of course, need it for our complete end-to-end enterprise architecture framework to link it up with all the other content we manage. And, of course, for every customer of SAP, then this model is available via Power Designer to be used in a transformation program. Yeah, so that should be an automatic process. So this kind of content management doesn't work in a manual manner. Yeah, so we invested in really doing it in an automated manner.
Okay, because I see some questions in the chat box, and I will explain a little bit to the audience that we have the whole of the BIAN model available in our tool that we use. That's Magic Draw, and for the public site, so the BIAN.org site, all have access to the HTML version of the model, so you can browse to the model. For members, we do have a UML version available, and so the UML version is something you can upload. So there are some questions about the SAP mapping and so on and so forth. So there is also one question. Maybe you can reply to that one, Jens Peter. Has SAP mapped their core banking solution to BIAN, and is it available?
Yeah, so that is a cornerstone of why we actually imported it. So there are one of the cornerstones is that as soon as we have any BIAN-related discussion, that we can easily show and deliver any SAP software assets related to the BIAN structure. So first of all, show how it links up with SAP, and secondly, really deliver then on that. So what we have is that every software asset exactly knows how it relates to BIAN, and that end-to-end scenarios are then made available to link up these software assets, and it is visible via Power Designer how the software assets are linked up and how they finally make up a solution. So all based on the SOA principles then.
Okay.
Yeah, but this goes beyond BIAN, of course, because then we are really in a service-oriented architecture application world, which is linked to BIAN.
Okay, well, thank you. So just to make clear that from a BIAN perspective, we try to do as much as possible in, let's say, the open source space. Power Designer, of course, is a tool. There are some tools from other vendors like IBM who have the model in their tool, and maybe there are some other vendors who also have imported the model into their own tooling. So we, from a BIAN perspective, make it available in Magic Draw. That's the tool that we use to become more or less vendor agnostic. So just to make it clear to the audience. So if we go to some conclusions, we already had the conclusion from Howard that they have on top, and I think what we also learned out of the discussion from both the bank and the vendor, Howard and Jens Peter, that the common language is of the utmost importance. So the common language, if we're discussing loans, what are we discussing within loans? If we are discussing core banking, everybody has his own view on core banking, his own interpretation of core banking, what's in and what's out, and the model helps you at least to narrow down what we are discussing, what you want to purchase and what you want to replace. So the service landscape also provides you what we call a bank on a page view. Also mentioned several times, there are other views available for within BIAN, what you call the M4 model, and that gives you the possibility to migrate your current IT landscape to a more componentized landscape. And you saw how Howard used it with the color coding, and then you can narrow down and you can what we call externalize some of the capabilities out of your current legacy systems, and then gradually migrate to the outside world. If you want to know more, we have on the BIAN.org site, we have 4 versions, 4 volumes more of what we call the how-to guide. And the how-to guide, at least the number 4, applying the standards, explains in more detail how you can use the model in a vendor assessment, but also how you can use the model if you want to migrate from a point-to-point solution to an enterprise service bus. So the number 4 gives you more background details on the discussion we have in this webinar. And I just want to, for those who are not familiar with this, give you a little bit of an explanation about BIAN. We are a not-for-profit association, so we are member-driven, and we are not owned by anyone. It's one member, one vote. You already saw the slide with the members, so it's about 60 plus 66 members. And of course, there's a difference between a member and a non-member. So the non-members have access to all published material. So everything we as a membership agreed on is available on the BIAN.org site. So we 2 weeks ago, we published our service landscape 4.0, so you can access all the material, you can browse the material, you can download all the PowerPoint and the PDFs and so on and so forth. It's there for the whole of the industry. On the other side, we have the member area. In the member area, you will have all the material, published and non-published, meeting minutes, address details, But as a member, you also have access to the UML, and you have access to all our meetings. We don't charge for our meetings, so we have physical meetings, we have virtual meetings, and of course we invite people to attend the different working groups. So we have around 20 plus working groups, loans, payments, wealth management, and so on and so forth. So there is a lot to gain, and you get the most out of BIAN if you join and participate in a working group. You can on a day-to-day basis, everything you discuss in the working group, use in your daily practice. So these are the membership fee, and I already explained we are not for profit, so the membership fee is need to cover our running costs, like this webinar as an example, and we have these membership fees in place since we started in 2008. We never change the figures, and we are never intend to change the figures, just to cover our costs. So it's not a huge amount of money. I know there's always someone who has to pay for it, but this is bottom line what we charge. And then we have our different meetings and engagement levels. So 3 times a year we have a physical meeting. So in 2-3 weeks we have our next meeting in Brussels, and on June the 15th we have also in Brussels an introduction day. So are you interested? Do you want to know more? Do you want to meet the people? Get more in-depth knowledge of what we are doing? You're more than invited to join our introduction day in Brussels. It's also good to know that we started an initiative in North America, so we have a North American chapter that we are setting up, and the first meeting is scheduled for September in Buffalo, hosted by First Niagara Bank. So the second level of participation is those who are a member and are volunteering to do the review of material produced by others. So that's very valuable for us. And of course the last is and the best from my perspective, is if you are participating in working groups I just mentioned, and that will cost you, besides the membership fee, an additional investment of 10 days on an annual basis. So this is an overview, an insight of what we have to offer, what we like you to participate, because we cannot do it without the industry. And yes, Peter and Howard also made it clear. It's the common effort that brings us where we are today. So I will now be open for questions. So if you have a question, please type them in the chat box, and I will ask someone who is knowledgeable to answer that question. So feel free to ask a question. We have 4 or 5 minutes still to go. So I have a question from Tim. Of the service definitions are also available in Excel format. Well, we had them available in Excel format, Tim. We brought them all into the Magic Draw repository, so the same content should be available in the Magic Draw repository. But if needed for some members, we can make the service domain definitions available again in the Excel sheet, but we need to do some tidying up on the Excel sheet. So it's available, but then you need to have some additional explanation. So just drop me a note, and we can see what we can do for you. Any other questions?